We're taking a trip down under this episode. Rob Macaulay, CEO of Greyhound Racing New South Wales, joins us to talk about Australian greyhound racing and rehoming, coming up next on Greyhound Nation. This is Greyhound Nation, episode 35, recorded February 23rd, 2023. Australian greyhound racing and rehoming with Rob Macaulay, CEO of Greyhound Racing New South Wales. Greyhound Nation is a podcast for greyhound enthusiasts produced by greyhound enthusiasts. To learn more about our show and its hosts, visit our website at greyhoundnation.dog. That's greyhoundnation.dog. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Greyhound Nation podcast. I'm Michael Burns. Now, here's your host, John Parker.
Welcome back, Greyhound lovers. We have a first today here on Greyhound Nation. Our first episode guest from Down Under. Talking to us today is Rob Macaulay, the CEO of Greyhound Racing New South Wales. Welcome, Rob.
G'day, John, and g'day to your listeners and viewers. It's very nice to be here. Thank you.
We're really glad to have you as our first Aussie guest. We're going to talk a little bit today, listeners and viewers, about a new rehoming initiative that Greyhound Racing New South Wales has launched, and we're also going to just talk generally about greyhound racing in New South Wales in particular, and Australia in general. So, Rob, let's talk a little bit about your background and how you came to be the CEO there at Greyhound Racing New South Wales.
Thanks, John. So I am a nearly lifelong lawyer in one capacity or another, doing all sorts of interesting work over the years. But 4 odd years ago, I came to be working as an external legal counsel for this business, Greyhound Racing New South Wales, and I found it fascinating and interesting. It is a wonderful sport filled with wonderful people and absolutely fantastic dogs. And so I think I became more and more enamored of it and more interested in it as time went on. And I've become so deeply immersed in it when they decided to look for a new chief executive officer, I applied for the role and was lucky enough to be successful in that application. So I'm very pleased to be here.
Do you remember when you went to your first greyhound race?
I do, and it was interesting. It was actually a long time ago, long before I joined Greyhound Racing New South Wales, and it was down in Victoria, and which for those of your listeners is 1,000 kilometres or 600 miles south of where I am, and it was very interesting. It was an eye-opener for me, and in the old days, really, of greyhound racing in Victoria. A lot of things have changed, of course, and we pride ourselves on being, very modern and sort of hopefully leading the way here now.
So let's talk a little bit about how greyhound racing is organized in New South Wales, what your organization does, its regulatory function, and so forth, and then we're going to talk a little bit about how the tracks run and so forth. So let's start first with the organization. What does Greyhound Racing New South Wales do?
So, John, Greyhound Racing New South Wales itself is a statutory organisation that is governed by the government and by a special act of the New South Wales Parliament. So New South Wales is a state of Australia. We have a federated system. It's very similar to your system. In fact, when it was being set up, the United States was very much used as a template for our federal system. And so the New South Wales government, which would be akin to a larger or largest state government in the United States, has a Greyhound Racing Act, which governs greyhound racing and governs the organisation of it. And so Greyhound Racing New South Wales is the commercial operator of greyhound racing. And there is a regulatory function, that is the policing function, integrity function, that is performed by another statutory authority called the Greyhound Welfare and Integrity Commission, that work parallel to us. So we operate in New South Wales 30 greyhound racing tracks. They run from everything from small country town tracks to very substantial metropolitan tracks like Wentworth Park, which is the biggest greyhound track in Australia. And they are largely run by clubs that are formed within the community. So the actual greyhound racing is put on by a club, often enough by a club, not always, and sometimes by larger organisations like trainers associations that run in New South Wales half a dozen clubs all at the same time. So it is a great synergy between a whole lot of people, volunteers on one hand and clubs on the other, and the statutory authority, us on the one hand and the regulator on the other, and of course our wagering service partners and a whole lot of other people who all then come together to support trainers and owners racing greyhounds at all sorts of tracks. And so of those 30 tracks, we have what I'm not sure what you folks call them. We call them one-turners, big tracks. They're still a circle, as you know, a great big oval, but typically they're large enough that a dog would only go around one turn of the track during the actual race. And then we have a whole lot of, the majority of our tracks are two-turn tracks. We race everything from 280 metres right up to some sort of marathon 840s, but typical race lengths would be in that 425, 25, 30 sort of mark. We run 11,000 races a year, 1,040 race meetings. We have revenues, wagering revenues of about $3.3 billion. In American terms, that's about 2.4 billion US dollars per annum. And all of that filters down through the various organisations and paves the way for a very good sport in New South Wales. Some other stats: we've got 5,500 registered participants in New South Wales and a racing population of dogs sitting around the 20,000 dog mark, with about 4,500 pups whelped every year. So that's in a nutshell.
Yeah, that's pretty good. How is Greyhound Racing New South Wales funded? Is it a government funded organization, or are you self-funded through wagering revenues and so forth?
It's a very good question, John, and like a typical lawyer, I'm not going to give you a straight answer. It's a mix of the two things. So the New South Wales government has some taxes on some wagering in New South Wales called a point of consumption tax, and so we get a dividend from that. We get about 20% of that tax revenue. But apart from that, what we call the wagering service providers, the betting agencies, they all give us a commercial clip of the ticket. And so our clip of the ticket in New South Wales is about 131 million Australian dollars a year. That's about 100 million US. And we use that to run our 30 tracks and to pay prize money and do all of those other things that you would expect us to do. We have a prize money pool of about $50 million per annum. We have, of course, you have probably heard, the richest single race in the world, and it is 1 million Australian dollars on the nose. The winner literally takes home a cheque for a clean $1 million, which in today's currency is about 640,000 US dollars for a single win in a 520 metre race at Wentworth Park. It's pretty exciting stuff.
Yeah, I would say, and that's for the winner. That's not spread among the first 3 or 4 placements.
No, that is straight out on the nose. Winner takes home a cheque for $1 million cool dollars. It's fun. It's exciting to watch. I mean, it changes someone's life, John. It's brilliant.
Yes.
It's fun.
Absolutely.
We've run that race was introduced 5 years ago, and it has been tremendously successful. And of course, it's expensive, but wow, it breeds some enthusiasm.
Yeah, I would say. Now, what's the how is the wagering done? Is it done through private independent bookmaking firms, or is there what we have in the United States like a parimutuel wagering system?
So we have both. So we've got the what we would now consider the relatively old-fashioned or traditional tote or the parimutuel system, which is again was born out of an old state-owned enterprise. It is now a publicly owned company, but is the remnant of what we call the Totalisator Agency Board. And that is the tote. So there is that on one hand, and then there is a whole bunch of companies, wagering service providers, bookmakers who run fixed odd betting, both on track, but mostly, of course, in this modern world, it is online on an app, right in front of you with streaming. So we provide digital streaming to as many of them as we can. So about 60% of the market is new fixed odds wagering providers, betting agencies, and about 40% is the old tote, what you call parimutuel betting.
Yeah. What about what are the races like? Are they 8 dog, 6 dog? How many dogs run in a race?
So we'd like to have 8 dogs in every race. We've certainly got 8 slots in the box, but we have tried different things. There was a suggestion some years ago that 6 dog races might have been safer. That was trialled, in fact, trialled very extensively, and very interestingly, we have proven categorically that in fact 8 dog races are safer than 6 dog races. So we now only run 8 dog races. We, of course, everybody likes to see full cards in every race, but we usually have an average field size of about 7.3 or 7.4 dogs per race.
What about match racing? Any match racing in New South Wales or Australia in general?
No, there's not, John, but it'd be fun and interesting to introduce. We are always thinking about new ways of exciting people, and match racing may be very well be on our cards to have a better look at. We've got great wagering service partners who are also always thinking and looking about new ways of doing things. So we're very open-minded to what sort of things we put on as long as it's safe. I say we only need to do 2 things. We need to race safely, and that is a conjunction, and we need to rehome. So race safely and rehome. And if we do those 2 things successfully, everything else falls into place.
Yeah, yeah. What's the setup here in the United States? As you may know, the dogs who are active racers live at the track in a kennel that's in a racing compound. What's the setup in Australia like? Do they live at their trainers' facilities, or do they live at the track, or what's the arrangement?
It's a very good question. It is totally the opposite of what your arrangements are in the United States, John. We have no dogs living at tracks. We have a system where trainers, large and small, have their dogs in their backyards or in their facilities wherever they happen to be. So those 5,500 participants that we have in New South Wales, when I say that, I'm not talking about people who come to races. I'm talking about people who are licensed participants. So they are trainers or owners or dog handlers or breakers or whatever part they play in it. Those people all have dogs in their backyards or in their paddocks, in their facilities and kennels around the place, and they all bring them to the track, which means our participants in New South Wales do a lot of travelling. So the state of New South Wales is more than 1,000 miles north to south and well over 1,000 miles east to west, and we've got tracks dotted all over it. Here's an interesting little fact, John. Our most western track in New South Wales is at a fantastic mining town called Broken Hill, and it's within spitting distance of the border to South Australia and it is a 14-hour drive from Sydney, which of course is on the east coast of New South Wales, and it is closer to drive to Adelaide down in the south of Australia than it is to drive to the next nearest big town. And so people in Broken Hill are 5 hours away from Adelaide, but they are 8 hours away, for instance, from the nearest vet in New South Wales. So it's a very remote place with, interestingly enough, therefore an almost quarantined bubble of greyhound dogs and participants, which makes for a very interesting mix of people who have grown up all their lives knowing each other, and with a pool of dogs that seldom comes and goes. It's fantastic fun. It's very interesting. It's a very family and friend-oriented sport in a town of only 20,000 people, which is very interesting way out there. And then you've got, of course, we've got 5 million people who live in Sydney, and we've got 2 major metropolitan tracks, big tracks in Sydney, where it's quite different. It's much more city-based and big stuff with, of course, bigger prize money.
Yeah. So can a trainer pretty much race his greyhounds at any track in New South Wales, or do they tend to have booking contractual relationships with just 1 or 2 tracks?
No, John, everyone is a free agent. You can take your dogs anywhere you like, and people, of course, unsurprisingly enough, chase either the track conditions or the competition or particular series or the prize money or the combination of all. Sometimes they're chasing mere convenience. So it might be the convenience of driving 10 minutes down the road to the nearest track, but often enough, of course, they're chasing the big prize money that might be a long way away. So everybody's a free agent. There is no nomination fee for any race in New South Wales. So people can nominate a few days before a race meeting, and as long as they can get their dogs there, happy days. Got to go through the normal on-track vet checks and all of the other things that we're all used to, but everybody's a free agent.
That's great. Now, in any given race, who wins prize money? Just the winner, or how many placements win prize money?
So we've just expanded it out. Only about 6 months ago, we expanded to 4th place. Traditionally, it has only been 1st, 2nd, and 3rd, and now we offer a modest 10% of the purse to the 4th place dog, where we're trying to, I suppose, democratise it a little bit more, spread the joy a little bit. We've never had more prize money in New South Wales than we have now, and one doesn't want it concentrated all in the hands of the very best people with the very best dogs. So it's our way of spreading the joy a little bit, I suppose.
Now, in Australia, do you have what they call in England run money, that each dog gets paid so much money for just being in the race and running, no matter what place he or she comes in?
We do. We have travel. We call it travel money in New South Wales. It is $60 per dog, so that's about $40 in the roundest terms, US, which you just get for effectively showing up and having a run. If your dog is kennelled for a race, even if it doesn't end up running, we will pay the travel money. And part of that, John, is about the very substantial distances that are travelled. Many of our people would travel 2 or 3 hours or more, some of them many, many hours to get to a race meeting. And, we all see the price of petrol and diesel nowadays, and the cost of running our equipment and feeding our dogs and doing all of the other absolutely necessary things of running a racing kennel. So it's an expensive sport for many people, and there is very substantial wagering revenue on it, and therefore dividends. So it's the right thing to do to sort of democratise it or place that foundational level of money underneath just being able to turn up.
Yeah. Now, I had a question that came up this past week. I was looking at a news report about a track in Queensland that had just done a major renovation, and they had some pictures of it, and they had redone the grass surface, and there were questions: how many tracks in New South Wales, if any, have grass grass racing surfaces?
So that's a good question, and raises the old rivalry of opinion about who wants grass or who wants either loam or sand, which we use interchangeably. We have half a dozen tracks that have grass surfaces, and we use two different types of grass. Predominantly, we have raced on kikuyu grass, which is better in the warm temperatures. You folks, I know you're from Georgia, John. You folks would be used to kikuyu down there. I think you call it
Bermuda.
Yes,
Bermuda,
Bermuda.
right? Yeah,
That's right. So we use a fine leafed version of that on most of our tracks, on most of our grass tracks. We have, though, just built and are just now finishing a brand new track a bit north of Sydney, where we're using couch grass for the first time, which is, of course, it's another trailing grass, but it is a much finer leaf, and we're told has much better resistance to wear, and it'll spring back quicker. So the problem with the grass tracks, of course, is that you've got to, wherever we get a frost, we've got to give them a bit of time off, particularly in early spring, to do a bit of reconditioning, and that puts a break in the racing for that period. There's a long answer to your question, John. By far the majority of our tracks are sand or loam, and we use a mix of 80%, largely 80% sharp sand with about 20% loam in it. Strangely enough, of course, watering a sand track takes us more water than it takes to irrigate a grass track, perversely. Yeah. And in a land that is riven regularly by drought and is just naturally a very dry country, water use is one of the things that informs our decisions depending on where we are.
What do the proponents of the grass, and this will be my last question, we'll get on to the other aspects of racing. I'm just fascinated by this grass versus sand. What do the proponents of the grass track say is the reason that they prefer grass?
The races are a bit slower with a softer footfall, and a grass fan would say they lead to lower limb and muscle and bone injuries because of the slightly reduced speed. It might be 2 or 3% slower. The sand people would argue that you get more little toe injuries, for instance, from grass. I've got to tell you, our stats don't bear out either of those views. There is, after as stats often do, the actual data indicates that there is no statistically significant variation in safety between a grass track and a sand track, as long as, of course, the other factors of track safety are there. The surface is well maintained, the transitions are right, the radiuses of each end of the track are sufficiently large. All of those design and maintenance features are right. Then there's very little difference between grass and loam. Grass does look better on a beautiful summer day.
Oh yeah.
A brilliant green grass track looks like paradise, and it looks like a dog paradise, doesn't it? It looks really good.
And you don't have to flush sand out of the dog's eyes at the end of the race. Nobody's got sand thrown up in their face during the race.
That's right. It's much harder and more labour intensive, of course, to curate grass.
Yeah.
But it's horses for courses, really, to borrow somebody else's pun. We find both of them very good, and some people, of course, some trainers and some dogs have a personal preference for one or the other, and they will travel to race on their desired surface. It's the same, really, with the dichotomy of fans and otherwise of round versus straight track racing. Some people in New South Wales have very much taken to straight track racing, and for all sorts of reasons, but it has its fans, and some people prefer the old circle tracks.
Any hurdle racing in New South Wales?
Not right now, but I can tell you it's being actively discussed. I had a conversation with somebody just yesterday about hurdle racing, and that as an interesting sport for the dogs is probably a nice, good, safe, and interesting thing to do here. And we'll like everything else, John, we have a very open mind. We'll look into it as long as and we'll probably trial some of it. As long as we can do it safely and well, we'll be happy.
Yeah, one of our frequent guests on Greyhound Nation, Charlie Blanning from England, who was the keeper of the Greyhound stud book, he says that in the old days they would take the fighters, the dogs that had been ticketed, and put them in hurdle races because the hurdles tended to keep their attention on running rather than the dogs they were running with, and that it worked beautifully. They could take a dog that might be ruled off from flat racing and put them in a hurdle race, and they would do just fine.
That's good. Maybe we'll have a look at doing that. We've got a few of those dogs here from time to time, mate.
Now let's talk about rehoming a little bit. First, the National Rehoming Agency there, Greyhound as Pets, Greyhounds as Pets. Tell us a little bit how that organization works with Greyhound Racing New South Wales.
Yes. So Greyhounds as Pets is a charity that is fully funded by us, and it's not paid a dividend. It's just funded to the full extent of its needs. It is responsible for both our entire rehoming program and also what we call our Greyhound Care Scheme. So that is taking and treating any injured dogs and rehabilitating them, doing fixing a broken leg, for instance, and returning the dog as a pet, and sometimes either back to its owner or trainer, and sometimes more often to a new family.
Now, does Greyhounds as Pets in New South Wales, do they do rehoming of almost all the dogs that are rehomed, or do trainers and owners have the option, if you will, of being able to rehome them directly with a friend or family member or just somebody they may know?
It's a good question. It's a whole mix. It's all of the above, John. So there's multiple organisations involved in rehoming in New South Wales. There is Greyhounds as Pets. There is the biggest rehomers are trainers and owners, frankly. They rehome about just over half of all of the retiring greyhounds in New South Wales are rehomed either as pets by owners more often, or rehomed by trainers to people in their network, or family friends of theirs, or whoever else they come in contact with. We deal with every year we deal with about a quarter of all of the dogs that become available for retirement through Greyhounds as Pets. And traditionally, I think we probably take the less tractable dogs. The immediately rehomable dogs often enough stay with owners or go out through trainer networks, and so we can take dogs in, and often it's just a simple matter of training the chase out of them, because of course you can't have that when you go for a walk in the park. So there's some basic training, and then dogs get put up on the Greyhounds Pets website. They do all sorts of the normal things that all of these organisations do. They do adoption days, and they do special things all over the place, and people love greyhounds. People who know greyhounds or are introduced to greyhounds fall in love with them. It's very interesting. The only people who want to stop greyhound racing, people who don't have any idea of how much they are loved by greyhound people. So Greyhounds as Pets New South Wales have a series of fantastic programs, and where they're always looking for new things to do, and this is what has given rise to our desire, really us becoming aware that there was this massive demand in the United States for greyhounds as pets, and our dipping our toe in that water, so to speak.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about that. That's one of the initiatives we wanted to focus on for this episode. How did that? That's a recent development there in New South Wales. How did that get started?
Well, we've had our eye on it for a little while, and of course we'd heard that the Irish retire a few greyhounds in the United States, and then we heard that the Victorians had sent over a few batches of greyhounds to be met with very significant demand there. And so we thought we'd have a better look at it. And we, in fact, were recipients of some communication from a couple of different organisations in the United States who literally expressed their interest in Australian greyhounds and invited us to come and take a look. So we have dipped our toe just in that water with a shipment of 8 dogs that landed in Los Angeles on 26th of January this year, which of course is Australia Day. It was a fantastic day for them to land, and they were immediately adopted. They were met by, we couldn't believe it, they were met by, catch this, 8 dogs were met by 24 people who were driven all the way from Tucson, Arizona.
Yeah.
Because they love greyhounds. And so they'd driven there, and these greyhounds immediately fall into the arms of people who not only understand them, but absolutely are enthusiasts about the breed, which was very, very pleasing. We were stunned, amazed, thrilled, really, by the reception. And so we're about to send another 8. And if Americans love our dogs, we are happy to send quite a few. We understand that there's very few greyhounds bred in the United States anymore, and there seems to be an enormous interest in this, really most noble of breeds of dogs. So if we can help with that, we'll certainly do that.
That's great. What are the plans for the next for this year, for example? What you anticipate you'll be sending groups over regularly?
We do. So it's been a month since the last group left, and we'll send a group now. And we have very strong demand from a few places, Dallas and Seattle in particular, and Chicago and Arizona, Tucson in particular. We've got various people who are telling us they'd like a lot. So we're looking at sending about 120 greyhounds this, what we call this financial year, that is before the end of June. I'm not sure if we can, in fact, I'm almost certain we can't meet the demand for the dogs. These are all, well, they're great dogs. They're great pet dogs. They're carefully selected to be the right dogs because we want the welfare to be a perfect solution. So we're sure that we can't meet demand. Look, to be frank, John, we're getting lots of inquiries, and we will have difficulty sourcing enough greyhounds to meet even the current demand over there, which is fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely. What are the financial aspects of it? For example, are the dogs sent over already having had their spays, neuters, dental, etc.?
Yes, so we do the normal, what you'd call the whole suite of veterinary work. They are all desexed. They all have either C5 and C2I or C7. To send them to the United States, we've got to give them a rabies vaccine. We, of course, don't have rabies in Australia, but we rabies vaccinate all of these dogs 30 days before they go. We give them full dentals, so they're fully serviced, if you like, before they arrive in the United States, and they are effectively rehomed before they are even dispatched from here. So we suspect, we'll see how this goes, but we suspect that the people the demanders, the market in the United States, will signal to us a bit what type of dog they want: large ones, small ones, male ones, black ones, and there's a lot of matching goes on. We know our dogs well enough. We can match people's needs with particular traits of dogs. We know which dogs need a paddock to run around, and we know which dogs will tolerate a cat, and we know which dogs can live in an apartment. We know the dogs that are bone lazy. We know we know about getting the right fit for our dogs for people. So there's a lot of matching. There's a lot of planning and matching that goes into it.
And I assume with the vetting having been taken care of in Australia, the receiving groups in America don't pay any cost for that.
No, so they don't. So as I understand, there are different groups in the United States, and they have different arrangements there, whether they have adoption fees or no adoption fees. We are paying for the air freighting and the veterinary fees for the dogs before they leave here. And interestingly enough, the costs are in a fairly equivalent rehoming in Australia or the United States. I think because the adoption waiting period is much shorter going to the United States, so there's less inherent cost, notwithstanding you've got an airfare on the way. But what has thrilled us about the opportunity in the United States is, I think Americans generally, I know this is a broad generalisation, but Americans, I'm not sure there's anyone who loves dogs as much as American people. Americans are so keen on dogs that all of them, they're a member of the family. I travel with some regularity to the United States, and I'm always impressed by the sheer love of dogs in the US. And it kind of, it makes us confident that our precious greyhounds are ending up with the right people in the United States. It really does, instills confidence in us.
Yeah, that's great. Well, that's certainly the beauty of part of the program, is that the receiving groups over here have been doing it for decades, and they're practiced in screening, and they know what an applicant, what they can separate the good applicants from the not so good applicants. So you can be sure that over here the homes they go to are well screened before they're approved, and most groups have 10, 15, 20 approved applicants at any one time. That's the nature of the demand. I know I'm not telling you anything you don't already know, but it's the demand just continues here. What about one of the big ticket items for importing a greyhound from another country is the transport, the air cargo cost. Who pays that for the New South Wales greyhounds coming over?
We do, and it's pretty expensive. It's about $2,000 US, but in the great scheme of things, that is a cost that we're prepared to bear. And I'll tell you why. It's exactly the opposite here. Here there is a lineup of greyhounds waiting for adoption, and in the United States there's a lineup of adoptees or adopters waiting for greyhounds. And so here greyhounds have to wait a little while. Our average greyhound takes 77 days to adopt in New South Wales. In other words, it's in our hands or in our kennels doing training and waiting for the perfect family for about 77 days. But in the United States, mate, John, literally, they are lined up waiting of properly assessed, well-intentioned and well-resourced adopters. And so there's no waiting time. So the time cost balance evens out with us paying the airfares. We're hoping that the more dogs we send, we of course are hoping that the airfares will get cheaper. We'll see.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, how many greyhounds in New South Wales come up? How many are withdrawn from racing every year, retired, injured, whatever it may be? About how many are available for rehoming each calendar year in New South Wales?
So about 2,000 are available through us or other adoption agencies. So of the 4,000 that are retiring every year, about a quarter stay with their owners or trainers, and about a quarter are adopted out by their owners or trainers to other people. And then we and other adoption agencies deal with about 2,000, so about half, in rough terms, about half of the retiring dogs per annum. So what I always think of it as, I always think there's a pipeline in and there's a pipeline out. So over here, there's 4,500 pups being whelped every year in New South Wales, and and that's been fairly steady for about the last 5 odd years. And so realistically, but for the normal early pup attrition and death, over here, really in rough terms, there's about 4,500 retiring in any given year as well. So about half with owners and trainers and their friends and families, and about half to new adoptive families who are not within the greyhound industry.
Yeah. One of the things we never had here was a traceability system. We could never. We all kind of knew we were at 100% adoption, or rehomed for breeding, retained for breeding, but we never really could prove it. We didn't have a traceability system because there was no requirement that anybody file a report when a greyhound was withdrawn from racing for its life. What's the traceability system in New South Wales?
It's 100% traceable. So we went through a great big trial by fire 6 years ago, where the New South Wales government was concerned enough about animal welfare issues within the greyhound industry that they came out and overnight announced the closure of the greyhound sport and the whole industry in New South Wales. That was 6 years ago, and that was a great surprise to a whole lot of people, and caused, as you might imagine, a huge amount of angst amongst greyhound people. The New South Wales government, the state government, walked back. They realised under public pressure, really, that they had trod on a snake. They had trod on into an area that was very dear to a lot of people, and I think perhaps they hadn't really thought about the animal welfare implications and the breed implications of banning the industry. And so within a relatively short period of time, weeks, they walked back from their ban, but with a whole lot of conditions, and those conditions included a much higher standard of welfare enforcement. And the truth is, John, that our attitudes as a society have changed dramatically in the last few decades in relation to animal welfare. And there were things going on in the greyhound racing sport that were simply intolerable in modern times, and they were stamped out. And perhaps we needed that trial by fire, because those people who possessed those very old-fashioned ideas are gone, drummed out of the industry. They were either banned or otherwise prohibited from taking part. And we now have really the rebirth of an entire sport in New South Wales that has come back much, much better, more safety focused, more welfare centric. And so all of the good people, the great people, they came through it because they were doing the right thing. They had evolved their mind to be welfare centric, and all of those people are now really the core of our sport in New South Wales. So it's really, John, a great redemption story. We got rid of the bad old days through a trial by fire, and we have rebirthed into the good days. And I and many other people in this organisation and in this sport believe very strongly in this, that real greyhound lovers are in the sport. Everywhere you look, John, you will see greyhound racing people who absolutely and utterly love their greyhounds and all want the best possible result. So we have now a very welfare-centric industry in New South Wales, and that is a good thing. It's a good thing that we've got, and it's a thing that we keep on working on all the time with advances in track safety, in other welfare reforms. We will try anything. If it's going to make a better outcome, we'll try it.
How is the traceability system carried out? Does the owner or trainer file a form when the dog is withdrawn from racing to report retained, rehomed, whatever?
So a little bit still, John, a little bit. There's still a little bit of form filling, but really what it mostly is an entire traceability system that is based on e-tracking. So one of the recommendations coming through our trial by fire was that this nascent technology of e-tracking was introduced across the board. And so everywhere a greyhound goes in New South Wales now, whether it's to most vets or to a trial track or to a race track, they are scanned, and the microchip in them is scanned with a little wand, and a record is made of that dog. So likewise, when a dog retires or, when it's born and registered, it will come onto the system, and then it will be lifetime tracking, or it is lifetime tracking. So that is, I'd say, 99% up and going now. That is administered by our colleague agency, the Greyhound Welfare Integrity Commission. So they're the regulators, and so they run that technology. And by the 31st of December this year, the end of this year, that will be fully across the system, and there'll be no more of this form filling and doing all of that sort of stuff. It's all electronic tracking, and it is cradle to grave.
Sounds like a little bit like you track a package that FedEx may have. In other words, wherever that scan occurs, the dog's scanned at a track. Okay, his last scan was at this track, and he hasn't been scanned in a month. Where is he? Is that basically how it works?
That is precisely it. And so at any one time, the location or last location of every greyhound is known, and it's given us, as you would imagine, a much greater insight into the life cycle of our dogs. So it's very interesting. It tells us all sorts of useful data about birth and racing career and retirement and injury and all of that sort of stuff that is then useful for forecasting, for instance, the demand for retirement and rehoming. So it's been quite good. The industry has taken a little while to get used to it. Every dog, even if it's sitting at home, if it's with a participant, they must, even if it hasn't been to a track, if it's become the family pet sitting on the lounge watching the TV, you've got to take it and have it scanned every 6 months. So it really is lifetime tracking.
Yeah. Now, and who serves as the registry of racing greyhounds in Australia? Is that what New South Wales does, or does each state's organization do that, or is there a central Australian registry for all Australian greyhounds?
There was a system, a registry developed some years ago, cooperatively by all of the states who all pooled their resources into building a special piece of software. That is the heart of the database, and that is then licensed out to all of the states. Most of the states, but not all, use that central registry. And of course, because we've got a state-based system, like the United States, when dogs cross borders, they will end up on the system of another state. And of course, now the states increasingly share that data. So we can tell for the first time, really, accurately how many dogs are exported from New South Wales, which we now know is about 1,000 per annum. And it tells us all sorts of very useful information to better manage the industry.
Yeah, interesting. Let's talk about a little bit about some more of the welfare initiatives. I was intrigued, and I've always been a little intrigued. We over here in the United States just shake our heads at the muzzle, the law requiring muzzles in public. How in the world did that get started? And why hasn't it been repealed now that we all know what gentle dogs greyhounds are?
Well, John, we are working on it, and it is not now mandatory for all dogs. So most of our dogs coming out of the Greyhounds as Pets program do not require a muzzle, but if they're a racing greyhound still, they do by law, and it is, who knows, some archaic hangover from the past. We would. It's a bit unfair, isn't it, to our wonderful dogs?
Yes, it is.
Because one could be forgiven for thinking that, oh, maybe that dog bites, when in fact we can demonstrate, and all greyhound people would know, that in fact they're much less likely to bite or do any of those things than really most other breeds. So we are working on it, John. It is a slow burn. Americans living in a great free nation like the United States might not quite understand how regulated we are in Australia. We constantly vote for governments that want to impose more rules on us all the time, and some government obviously many decades ago decided that muzzling greyhounds was a good thing and passed a law. And when there is a law, they're hard to get rid of, but we're working. We're working on it.
I have a theory that back in the not the 1800s, but the 1920s or 30s, that some racing greyhound grabbed up some politician's cat or something, and they said, okay, from now on, all greyhounds must be muzzled. And so I've just always just found that amazing that law still exists. But you can be exempted from it, and that's the famous green collar procedure. Tell us a little bit about that.
That's right. So it is indeed called exactly that. A greyhound can earn a green collar. Nearly all of the ones that retire do. It's just some training and retirement and desexing, and all of a sudden you're into this muzzle-free zone, which is much better. Interestingly enough, John, no, greyhounds do not object to wearing a muzzle. I mean, you've never seen greyhounds, shake their head or display any aversion to putting on a muzzle. It seems to not irritate them at all. But we'd like to see it change. But like everything else, John, you just want to do it incrementally, because as soon as we get out on the front foot and say there should be no more muzzles on greyhounds, there will be a very small segment of the community who comes out and is anti that. So we just tread carefully. We understand there's people who are vehemently against both greyhound racing and indeed all or any form of animal racing. And this is why we do tread carefully, and we try and make all of our decisions responsible. So we're not trying to change everything all at once, mate.
Yeah, very good. Now, what about injury statistics keeping and so forth? What's that system like in New South Wales? What are the requirements for keeping injury reports? Where do you start? What constitutes an injury and so forth? Tell us a little bit about that system.
So we have all of the states get together, and we have a national body which is called Greyhounds Australasia, unsurprisingly enough. It's called Australasia, by the way, because we include our cousins on the other side of what we call the ditch over in New Zealand. And so it is all of the Australian states plus New Zealand. And we have this organisation called Greyhounds Australasia, and they define on a national basis the categorisation of injuries. And it is based obviously on how serious or otherwise an injury is. It starts with catastrophic injuries and goes down to things that, in my view, most people would not consider an injury, like simple muscle soreness, for instst, post a race. you or I, John, would go out for a run or go to a gymnasium and lift some weights or do something, and we would expect some muscle soreness, and you wouldn't consider yourself injured as a result of that. But in New South Wales and indeed Australia, we are sensitive enough about properly recording all injuries that we even go down to that level. It's all done by the regulators, so it's not done by us who are commercially racing. It is done by the Greyhound Welfare and Integrity Commission, who employ a whole lot of what we call OTVs, on-track veterinarians, and those OTVs attend every race meeting, and they inspect every dog both before and after races, and they attend to injuries, they categorise injuries, they record injuries, and indeed if there's a bad injury they will treat, stabilise, do whatever's necessary in relation to an injury on the night. So it's all done. It's all done by an independent third party who employs a bunch of people really to ensure that that's right. And they also do the wagering integrity as well. So they do the drug testing and all of the other things that are related to racing and wagering integrity, which is very valuable to us. Nobody wants to have a punt on a product that may not be straight. So we are very supportive of this work. It's hugely important to the clean nature of the industry and our racing product that we have a strong level of integrity.
How does the racing injury reporting translate to, real-time action on the track? In other words, maybe one track is reporting they have a spike in hock fractures, for example. Mm-hmm. How soon do they know that so that they can begin to look at their racing surface to see if that might be the culprit?
Almost in real time. So if there is a mortality on track, I will learn about it that night, usually within an hour or so. And then there are a number of people involved right there and then. There'll be a track manager, an ambulance driver, the on-track veterinarian, and the stewards who are GWIC, that's the Integrity Commission. The GWIC stewards will all be involved somehow in putting together a report about that. The track conditions where the injury occurred and more generally are recorded. And so we can start drilling down almost on the day to what are the causative factors of the injury. As you know, about 75% of injuries occur as a result of collision on track. Mm-hmm. But it's the other ones that you can sort of go to immediately on the night. Then afterwards, every 2 weeks, there's what's called a race injury review committee that sit down and actively looks for causative factors that might be addressed. So a most basic example might be that that a section of a track, particularly a sand track, might be discovered to be too hard, or a section of fencing that doesn't have, for instance, cushioning on it or padding on it might be determined to needing cushioning or padding, and we will immediately go and attend to that. So we're quite responsive. There's some longer term things, engineering things, that we are also informed about by track injuries. So things that are a bit more of a slow burn, things like camber on corners and radiuses of turns, width of tracks, track surface conditions, all of those things that we keep incorporating into our designs to make better and more safe tracks. So there's some immediate stuff and there's some stuff that takes a while longer, but we are always, the next track we build or renovate, we're trying to make that the best track ever. It's a constant work of improvement to get it as best as can be done. We strive for world's best practice, to lead the world in the safety of our tracks and the safety of the dogs on those tracks.
What about fracture repair? When you have a fracture, is there a funding mechanism to pay for the veterinary costs for repairing that fracture?
There is. There's a Greyhound Care Scheme, we call it GCS, and the GCS will effectively pay the entire cost of, right up to serious costs of orthopedic repair of bone fractures. It's an interesting thing that we're discovering is that there seems to be a move away from the typical old hock fracture into more long bone type fractures that are probably in one way or other more orthopedically repairable than hock fracture. Hock fractures, as you know, can be quite complex. Mm-hmm. I'm not suggesting that long bone fractures aren't complex either, but often enough they are in a more accessible place that's more amenable to fixing. But we take a dog on the night. If a dog is injured at a track and it can be pain treated and stabilised and transported to a vet, then every track has effectively a Greyhound ambulance person at it who will transport that dog on the night to a 24-hour vet, where often enough it's stabilised at night and ensured that it's pain-free, and then the range of diagnostic tools can be used the following day, x-rays, sonographs, whatever it takes, and then people can make an assessment. But the short answer to your question is we will pay all of the costs of veterinary bills to repair a dog. We are absolutely committed to fixing injuries when they occur.
Yeah, that's great. Because so many injuries can be repaired and the dog can be returned to full function. Some even can go back to racing, but they can certainly make a pet that's sound and doesn't have a limp and it's not lame at all. So, yeah, I've seen in my own experience how greyhounds can recover very well from even the worst kind of fracture.
I think, interestingly enough, it's a mark of the dog, isn't it? We have this amazing breed that has been bred. Of all the dog breeds you can think of, this, as a working dog, has been bred for durability.
Yes.
The natural end result, or the natural evolution of 8,000 years of breeding, is all about durability, speed and durability, because there's no point having a fast dog if it's not durable. And this is one very interesting aspect that is often not in people's minds very much about thinking about a pet or the breed of a pet dog, is that there are all sorts of breeds that have been ruined by line breeding or breeding for aesthetic traits that
Yes.
someone somewhere has decided is a good thing to have. So you have French poodles that have been bred to have a tiny little pelvis, so they, a funny little cone shape, and they've been
Yes.
bred to have a short nose. And
Yes.
so somebody has taken what was probably 400 years ago a durable breed of dog, and they have engineered it into something that is not durable, where our greyhounds are exactly the opposite.
Yes.
Our greyhounds have been bred to survive and to go fast and to not break legs, because of course that's a natural thing that would preclude a greyhound from being bred from would be an injury. And so we have the benefit of thousands of years of breeding a durable animal. So they don't have, as you know, they don't have hip dysplasia, and they don't have breathing problems, and they don't have many of the modern maladies that have been bred into, show dogs, really.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I often challenge anti-racing people to name a breed that has more genetic diversity than the racing greyhound, and they never can. And because I don't think they exist, I think probably the racing and coursing greyhounds are the most genetic diverse breeds on the earth, still because of racing.
I think you're absolutely right. The only other breeds that might go close are some other working dogs, like Kelpies and Australian cattle dogs, for instance, that are, again, bred for durability, endurance, and unbreakability. But of course, they come from those two breeds I've just mentioned come from a hugely smaller pool of dogs than greyhounds do. We've got 25,000 greyhounds just in New South Wales in the racing industry, let alone the retired greyhounds. And so I think you're entirely right. The pool of genetic availability is huge in greyhounds around the world, and of course it's more portable than ever. So whilst we have very strict quarantine rules in Australia, we don't have things like rabies, and we don't have some other veterinary diseases in other breeds like foot and mouth, for instance. We have for years been very difficult to get dogs into, but of course you can import semen, and so we have an ability in greyhounds to keep breeding better dogs, and it happens. It happens, as you know, every day of the week. The breed keeps getting better, which is it's a huge success story.
Yeah, it really is. Now, as we kind of go into our home stretch of our episode here, Rob, I wanted to ask you a little bit about the immediate past and then the future of greyhound racing in New South Wales. Has racing in New South Wales recovered from the COVID lockdowns?
Interestingly enough, the greyhound racing industry, got through COVID unscathed. We enjoyed the support of a very supportive state government here that recognised the need for keeping on having sport. And so whilst many people were locked down in their houses, greyhound people and horse racing people and football people could still have competitions. And so that is exactly what happened. And the side benefit, John, of all of the population being locked down was that the confluence with technology, we had a fantastic wagering result through that period. It turned a lot of people on to greyhound racing, and we have found that the popularity that arose during COVID has never fallen off a cliff. Touch wood, we don't want it to.
Yeah.
And it has been, whilst one is very sympathetic with all the bad things that happened during COVID, the COVID period has been generally very upbeat for New South Wales greyhounds, and I think really greyhounds across Australia.
If somebody doesn't want to go to the track and wants to watch racing remotely, do more people watch it on the internet, or are there TV channels, sports channels on television that carry it? Or is it both?
So we broadcast on our own. We stream our races on our own website, and nearly all of the wagering companies, the betting companies, take our streaming service onto their app. So most people, 60 or 70% of people who are having a bet on their phone, can watch the race there. And in every pub and every club across Australia, there is a bunch of TVs on the wall, and it's called Sky Channel.
Yes.
And it's Sky Sports, and it is broadcasting nothing but racing. There's two channels, Sky 1 and Sky 2, and they broadcast both thoroughbred racing and harness racing and greyhound racing. And so it is very accessible from a vision point of view. It's broadcast well. Australians, John, are mad keen on what we call a punt, on having a bet. We're a bit of a betting country, as they say.
That was brought over from England. They say in England they'll bet on anything.
Mate, they say Australians will bet on two flies climbing up a wall. And if you cut around Australia, you'll see all sorts of amazing animal races. You'll see mud crab racing up in Queensland, and you'll see cane toad racing up north. You see people racing all manner of things. But the wonderful thing about greyhound racing is that there's no jockey on his back. Everybody understands that in the good jurisdictions with high integrity and high safety and welfare, things, it's a good straight sport where people who want to punt are getting a fair income, what we call a fair income, a real genuine product, which is what people need to have confidence in racing generally.
Yeah. And so far, nobody's taught a greyhound how to throw a race, have they?
No. They might be intelligent, they might be great dogs, but you can't yet whisper in their ear, mate.
Now, what about at the track itself, Rob? And we had a British guest in our last episode who talked about the fact that, it used to be a great day to go in the evenings or on a weekend, Sunday afternoon, and have a meal and so forth at the track, but that they've gotten lots, and we've had this in the United States as well, with people with difficulties with staffing in a hospitality setting, where they can't get enough wait staff for the restaurant or the bar or whatever. Have they had that problem with the tracks in New South Wales?
By and large, no. Probably because we don't really have very flash restaurants at our tracks. It's more in the nature of a canteen or a bistro. And so the good old Aussie meat pie is available nearly everywhere you go, and we're good, simple, clean folk in Australia. A few beers and meat pie and a few other goodies will do us for the food and beverage side of things. So, interestingly enough, in the bush, in country New South Wales, of course, there's probably a higher proportion of the population go to the track because it's a smaller community. People know each other more and it's much more social. Whereas in downtown Sydney, 2 miles, not even that, a mile away from me is a massive track called Wentworth Park, where over the years, thousands of people would go there on a night of greyhound racing, and now it's into the hundreds of people. But one of the things that I'm very much looking forward to do leading Greyhound Racing New South Wales is attracting people back to the track. I feel very strongly that we have to get people back on track. We have to reinvigorate actual attendance. It's no good for the sport, people just watching it on a TV or on their betting app. We want people to understand the dog, understand the excitement, see with their own eyes the really good nature of the sport itself. That's the way to win friends and influence people. And so it is one of our goals, and my personal goal is to bring people back to tracks for the experience. It has to be an experience.
Sounds like a perfect recipe for some match racing. That would bring people back to the tracks, I would think.
John, I've got some very smart people here thinking up all sorts of good ideas, and I will make sure that your recommendation of match racing goes into the great mix of ideas. And I tell you what, how about this, mate? How about the first match race we put on? We'll invite you over, and you can commentate straight from the.
I've been looking for an excuse to come down under, so I'll take you up on that. We had about 2 or 3 episodes back. We had Gary Guccione of the formerly of the NGA, and Charlie Blanning, who's a great greyhound historian. And one of the things they talked about were some of the famous match races and how much excitement those generated. These match races between 2 great greyhounds.
And see, that's the interesting thing, isn't it, John? We find ourselves heroing, if I can use that as a verb, heroing greyhounds now that we probably haven't done for a long time. So decades ago, of course, it was part of the sort of group consciousness that there was a famous horse or a famous dog. Even 90 years on, every Australian would know about the horse Phar Lap. And, there are, even people in America know about Phar Lap.
I've seen the movie.
Right. And we have some fabulous dogs like Zoom Top who are just as famous here. And I think increasingly our people watching greyhound racing are identifying with actual hero dogs and, interestingly enough, with hero trainers, with our sort of poster trainers who are able to articulate and be the face of greyhound racing. And I think one of the great attributes potentially of match racing is that you can have a star against a star. And mate, Australians love a punt, and when you can get on one side or the other, that's the recipe. That's a great recipe for success.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's look into the crystal ball here and tell us a little what you see for the future of greyhound racing in New South Wales. Do you think you will keep the same number of tracks without losing any? Do you think you'll add some? What's your best guess?
Look, this is a very, very difficult thing, because to close tracks, you're closing a community asset. And so we don't do it easily. But the countervailing argument to that is that safe tracks cost serious dough. They cost millions of dollars to build the safest track we can. The infrastructure costs themselves are very significant. And there is an increasing feeling amongst participants that we're better off having less tracks but much safer tracks than to keep diluting our assets all over the place. People, if you ask any greyhound trainer or owner, or indeed anyone who is a fan, they will tell you that the most important thing is the dog coming home on four legs, the dog coming home safely at the end of a night of racing. And that has got to be our guiding star in relation to track investment. And that probably means, John, more investment in slightly fewer tracks. Whatever I say here is going to go out on the rumour mill as quick as light travels, and so you might interpret correctly that I'm curbing my freedom of speech. It is a constant thought process that we enter into about what we do with tracks and how we invest. But our overriding desire is to have the safest possible outcome for our dogs. And we know that's good for our dogs and it's good for our people. And that is the most important thing.
Well, Rob, I think that's a great note to end on. I think the emphasis on safety and welfare in Australia is exemplary, and I think you're right. I think you all do exemplify best practices. So keep up the good work, and I think next time some of your colleagues come on over on a fact-finding mission, you're going to need to come with them.
Well, we'll come looking for you, mate. And look, thank you very much for having me and Australia on your show. It is very nice to know that right around the globe that there is this web of great greyhound fans, devotees to both the breed and racing, and it fills my heart with optimism that we're all doing the right thing. So thank you very much for having us on. We love America and Americans, and we know that you're fantastic adopters of our dogs, and we thank you very much for that, and we'll look forward to seeing you one day face to face.
Great. Thanks for being with us, and greyhound lovers everywhere. We'll see you on the next episode of Greyhound Nation.
Thanks so much for listening to the show. If you're not a regular listener, be sure to follow Greyhound Nation wherever you get your podcasts. We're also on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Just search for Grey Nation Show. Follow us, and you'll get notifications every time we release a new episode. You can also get new show notifications when you subscribe to our YouTube channel. If you liked the episode, leave us a review on our Facebook page or your favorite podcast app. You can also send us feedback or questions via the contact form on our website at greyhoundnation.dog. That's greyhoundnation.dog. This episode was produced in collaboration with host John Parker. Our theme music was composed and performed by Dimitri Taras. We'd like to thank Rob Macaulay for being our guest on this episode. You can learn more about Rob's organization, Greyhound Racing New South Wales, at their website, www.grnsw.com.au. If you're interested in the chance to adopt one of these retired Australian racers coming to America, reach out to your local Greyhound Pets of America chapter to express interest and put in an application. I'm Michael Burns, and you've been listening to Greyhound Nation.